Uh, Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the October meeting of the Neath Talbot Standards Committee. Welcome to those online and also to three of our group leaders. Thank you very much for attending today. Look forward to your item a little later on in the meeting. Can I remind everybody that because it is a meeting, of course, there are protocols to follow, one of which are ensuring that your mobile phones are switched off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. Our first item is any announcements, and I don't have any announcements to make, and I have welcomed you all to the meeting. Second item is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations from members of the committee? No, thank you. Our next item is the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 5 to 8.
Chair, could I call Councillor Carpenter in at this point? He's got an alteration to make. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair. It's just that I've been left off as being in attendance, and I was here. You might know.
Important. Thank you very much. We will amend the minutes. Otherwise, for members who are present, may I have your approval that they are correct record of the meeting? Yeah. Thank you very much. Our next item is the meeting with the group leaders. And Craig, would you like to introduce the item, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So as members of the Standards Committee and group leaders obviously will be aware, back in 2021, the legislation was changed, which created a new duty on our Standards Committee, which basically had to ensure that we were monitoring the new duty that was now being placed on group leaders. So what that is that there's a duty on political leaders to promote and maintain standards of conduct within members of their group and to cooperate with the Standards Committee in exercise of its functions. So a couple of key points just to be aware of. The duty does not make leaders of a political group accountable for the behaviour of their members. Otherwise, nobody would want to be a group leader if they had to be accountable for all the individual actions of some of their members. However, what they do is they have a role in taking reasonable steps in maintaining standards, setting an example, using their influence to promote a positive culture, being proactive in promoting high standards of conduct within their group, and addressing issues as soon as they arise. There was some guidance that was produced by the Welsh Government, which our group leaders have been aware of, and of course they've all attended a training session with me as we ran through what some of those obligations ultimately would be on them. So the specific role now for the Standards Committee is just about monitoring compliance with of those group leader duties and to make sure that everyone is working in harmony to make sure that the various duties are being discharged. And in the past year, our Standards Committee met with all the group leaders on an individual basis where we had a series of pre-arranged questions which gave you an opportunity to meet the group leaders, gain an understanding of some of the specific issues that they see within their group, and obviously then to help forge that relationship. And during the course of this year, we've had the group leaders produce their annual report to the Standards Committee, which we have included in your papers, which just gives you an overview of some of the actions ultimately that they've undertaken. So the purpose of today is to do a follow-up ultimately now from these meetings and to give you an opportunity to have some generic discussions with group leaders. There are no specific actions that we need to agree, no specific points that we need to try and take forward, but I think it's just more about you as a Standards Committee having the opportunity to meet with the group leaders to discuss any particular aspects of concern, and also the other way around where group leaders can look to the Standards Committee to help them support themselves in the functions that they undertake, and hopefully just have a general discussion about how everyone can work together with the ultimate aim that we all share, which is to ensure that members act in accordance with their code of conduct, are behaving ethically and discharging all of those functions that have been on them. So with that, Chair, I'll hand back to yourself to go forward with the meeting.
Thank you very much, Craig. And it's lovely to see you here. Last year was the first time that we'd had the opportunity to speak with you, and we did that individually. But I think as for this next year, we are trying something different, which is having you all together and perhaps having a less structured, a more informal approach and having more of a general conversation as to how things have been going and what you might like to see this from the Standards Committee, but also for everybody to engage with you. So thank you very much for that. And thank you. And I think the important thing is that we are developing a relationship between yourselves and the Standards Committee. And we did stress if I recall last year, the Standards Committee is here to help members and to help you deliver your roles and responsibilities as much as we can. I think it's very important that we do ensure that ethics and code of conduct and standards are upheld within the council. And I think this is an ideal way to do it, by building those relationships, learning from each other, and coming up with ways forward as to what we can do more to help you and assist you, and vice versa. And thank you very much for submitting your reports. We can see from the actions that you undertake yourselves as leaders that you are very active and very proactive in ensuring standards are maintained. So we thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think that also reflects in other papers that we've seen. And so, for example, in the report we had from the last meeting, which was the internal audit report, and there was our actions that we had taken were very well received by the auditor, and that was good to see the comments in that report. So it would have been nicer perhaps to have had a better forum in which to engage more, because it's a little bit difficult in the chamber, isn't it, when we're seeing maybe people's backs of heads or side views or whatever. But nevertheless, we shall make the best of it. And of course, we do have people online as well. So we need to keep a good eye on bringing those into the discussions as well. So we don't have any particular framework, although the report does set out the roles and responsibilities, and in paragraph 4, Craig has helpfully put in there what reasonable steps group leaders may like to undertake. Perhaps that is a good starting point, if anybody would like to contribute to that, or if any members of the committee would like to ask any questions of the group leaders. So perhaps starting with the group leaders to give an update as to where you are since the last time we met you.
Okay, then. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invite, firstly, and the work that you carry out. I mean, challenges, and I suppose reflecting on those challenges from last year and how we overcome them as well. I think it's not always easy in the current climate, but I know within the group, for myself, we have regular meetings. We also set up communication, whether good or bad, on social media. We have a certain number of groups so that every member has the opportunity to speak freely and openly with any concerns they may have, and that's on a personal level as well, because we must take into account sometimes, given where the pandemic and other aspects of working as a councillor is always a challenging time for us all. For me personally, I try to instill within our membership the importance of, as I put down a few notes, to promote civility and respect within group communications and meetings. We do that on a regular basis informally as well. So we try our best to make sure that each member understands how important their roles are, in not just in council but in public life as well, because all aspects of what you do is important to that. So I do, as a leader of the group, try to have as much communication through emails, as I said, texts and other formats, and I encourage each member. Now, training is still vitally important as I see it. I think it's quite critical. I'm not sure how much of the training has been offered to members individually to carry out their duties, but we must bear in mind when we do have this, that challenges of working with individuals is not always easy, because some may be working, they may have other different responsibilities and roles. Each member, I've got a number of cabinet members now within the group as well, so their time is probably limited in carrying out their duties. So, but it is still critical, I would say, that, you know, we work cross-party as well, and I'm sure Rob and Alan will clarify that. I think we must remember what our responsibilities are, and every opportunity, if legislation changes, you know, I go to Craig on a regular basis because it's important to understand the changing demographics of the circumstances that we are led to, you know, behave and be careful. Social media, I'll finish on, is becoming an even more toxic platform. It has its good points, of course. It's an important part of life. Hybrid meetings, as we have here today, you know, there's a number of your members on screen, but it's difficult platform to negate and engage with, because again, I try to encourage my members not to engage too much without making sure they've spoken to Craig Griffiths first, so that they don't get themselves into difficulties, because you certainly will. And I'm a perfect example of that. You know, I've been here 16 years, but because I'm very active on social media, I don't know how many telling offs I've had off Craig and others, because sometimes, you know, I I don't engage my brain before opening my mouth. And so I know my failings, but I try. I know Wayne's a member of the group, isn't it? But I try to, in each meeting, make sure that they understand their responsibilities and what they need to know, and encourage them to ask for further training, so that they carry out their duties to the best of their ability. So I could go on and on and on and on, but I will be quiet there now, because I know Rob and Alan want to come in. So thank you.
It might be a good opportunity to pursue the issue of social media, but would Alan and Rob like to say a few words first?
Yes. Certainly, thank you, Chair, and thanks again for inviting us to meet with you. I think we benefited from meeting with you last year. It helps, you know, raise our awareness of further raising awareness of our responsibilities as leader, and it's good to hear, you know, the dialogue taking place. And I do agree, Chair, with your comments about the chamber. Craig will know, and Tammy will know, that I often make the comments that it's probably my least favourite room for holding, especially sort of scrutiny style meetings or discussions. You know, it's a bit fun, but there we are. I think we meet here because of the technology. So that's what I've been explained to me anyway. But yes, I hopefully the points that that I made in the report continue to be as relevant. So I won't. They're very similar to the points that Steve, the council leader, has just made now. And you know, hopefully they're still relevant, so I won't repeat them all, but just picking up on a couple of the points. You know, training has continued. It doesn't stand still. We recently had a seminar led by Craig as the monitoring officer on council procedures, and although we've been here for quite a long time now, probably far too long, I was still learning from there were certainly several points that Craig made that I hadn't picked up on previously about aspects of procedures, and sometimes the meetings are on a more individual basis. Craig, you'll be aware, obviously we've recently met to discuss a couple of items with a member. I won't dwell on them, but you know, it was all very positive, and being given good guidance as usual from Craig as our monitoring officer. One thing which has changed during the year, it's not directly related to the code of conduct or members' conducts, but it is related to the way in which the council works, and that's been the introduction of the new scrutiny model, which I think it's still early days. You know, members are still getting used to it. I mean, those of us that are cabinet members are definitely still getting used to it. It's you know, it does enhance accountability in terms of policies and the operation of the local authority. And I think you know when we're all more familiar with it, I think it will benefit the way in which the council manages its work and accountability as far as members are concerned, but as far as the residents of the county borough are concerned as well. And so that's been quite a significant change over the past year. I know, Chair, you mentioned that you want to come back on the issue of social media, but I just jotted a couple of thoughts down, so I don't know if I can sort of share them now, because I think that's one of the most significant challenges that we face. And you know, I don't want to downplay some of the positive aspects of social media in terms of communication and participation. But there's no doubt that there is an element of social media, whether it's by Facebook or X, formerly Twitter, or the other platforms, that can cause stress and feel intimidating to members. You know, almost without exception, members join the council regardless of party because they want to serve their community, and they want to improve things for residents, you know. And so some of the comments that can be made on social media can be very, very difficult, particularly if members are less experienced either in terms of handling media, or are fairly new members of the authority. So on several occasions, further advice has been needed from the monitoring officer, from the chief executive, via myself as leader of the group, to support individual members who are having a bit of a hard time on local Facebook groups. Now, social media can also be a bit of a hazard for members as well. You know, members can get involved in arguments or sometimes make inappropriate comments, or can drift perilously close to the dreaded predetermination of issues, or planning decisions and so on. So again, as a leader of the group, I need to be available to advise members to be careful about the use of social media. I mean, I'm also still very much learning around the use of social media. I've often given the advice, which I think is the correct advice, that members it's probably better for members to have a separate Facebook page or presence as a member compared with their personal. Now, up until recently, I wasn't following my own advice on that. I didn't sort of personally feel the need for that. But I have to say, in terms of the way in which some discussions were going, I'm thinking, well, you know, this is my personal page, and it's, you know, it's used by my family and friends as well. So I have taken my own advice, you know, in recent months, and established a separate page as a councillor. Lots of people ignore it entirely, but but it's there for a purpose, you know. So there we are. I'll draw that to a close, Chair, if that's okay, to hand over to Rob. I'm happy to take any further questions or suggestions.
Well, I'm sure we pick up on some of those excellent points that you've made, Alan. Thank you very much. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to echo what my colleagues have said in relation to social media. Before we had hybrid working, everything happened in the chamber. You were looking at the backs of people's heads. This was the main meeting place, or the committee rooms. So we didn't know any different in the operation and the dynamics of how we were going to move forward. And of course, COVID changed all that. Then it would be face-to-face disputes, comments made on a one-to-one. The dynamics have completely changed now that we have access. It's not just Facebook. One of the biggest areas that I constantly have to monitor is WhatsApp groups. I'm sure my colleagues have got, you know, Plaid would have a WhatsApp group, the independent group, Labour have got WhatsApp groups, councillors have got WhatsApp groups, and then like we've got constituency Labour parties, there's a WhatsApp group for that. But then you join, because of part of your role, community WhatsApp groups, and you only need one word out of place, one sentence taken out of context, of what is typed is not what was meant. And people get uptight about that and make a complaint to you. There are occasions when I speak to Craig more than I speak to my wife, depending on the certain subject matter that we are referring to. But I also think the danger is individual members also taking a viewpoint on a biased basis, because it's their opinion and it's their viewpoint and may not necessarily be the correct or ultimately the right interpretation, because it's their viewpoint. And that is a very difficult thing to police in relation to being a leader. And whilst we're not accountable to individuals' conduct, for example, and I think I put it in my report, we meet as a group on a regular basis, and I'm constantly reminding people that you are a councillor 24/7, 365. You can never say I said that as an individual or I said that on a personal basis, because you are a councillor and you represent it. And I think one of the difficulties that I have as a leader, and I'm not sure if my colleagues would concur, is all too often, instead of abiding by the rules, people look to bend the rules, get round the rules. How can we get around X, Y, and Z? And that's what leads people into trouble. I encourage everyone in my group to come and speak to me, and very often I refer individuals to Craig for advice. But I think as a leader, you've got to know when that needs to be done. Because very often if you tell someone to do it, as opposed to suggesting someone to do it. And the way that the ombudsman's works, you know, with the self-referrals now, when I first was a councillor, you didn't get a self-referral, you get a complaint and that would be investigated or whatever. Now you're encouraged to self-refer in case you've got any doubt. And I think that is a good step. And if you've never dealt with the ombudsman, they are fair, but they also understand the political environment that you work in. And I think whilst we have social media training, to me, that's the big bugbear. That is the problem with all councillors in whatever guise, because you're open to attack, you're open to personal attack. You can never be right in some people's eyes. You know, when I sat in the chair that Steve was sitting in, it would be the council this, the council that, council the other. The person has changed. The accusations are still the same. So it doesn't matter who sits as the leader of the council. The accusations from people in the community are the same. I'm sure that someone had back brown envelopes for that. I wonder who was paid off to get that decision, etc., etc. So the subject matter is very prevalent to the accusations that are being made, because you do take it personally. When someone says, you know, you're corrupt, etc., you do take it personally. And I think we've got to move away from this culture. The rules are there, you know, what do they say? The guidance of wise men and the implementation for fools. And I think we've got to get away with that culture. The rules are there for a purpose. They're there to protect you. And I still think that members don't see that, that they're there for protection. They seem to think sometimes it's a constraint in the role that they want to do. But I think because of hybrid, you know, I'll finish where I started. We've been using this chamber since 1997. The dynamics of hybrid working, you haven't got that personal contact. You can't see the body language, the non-verbal communication. You can have someone, you know, there's been instances where people have been on the screen and they've smiled or raised their eyes to the heavens, and people have made contact and said, you can stop smiling, because they think they're smiling at something else. They may actually be listening to the TV or something, a member of the family have come in. So you don't see those dynamics, but people take that affront. And that is probably the most difficult thing to police. But social media, we're not going to cure it. We haven't got a magic wand that will be able to wish it to go away. It's now part and integrated in our way, our daily lives. Probably everyone here is on a Facebook page. Everyone here has probably got a WhatsApp group. You know, we even got villages in Markham. Every house is on that WhatsApp. You know, did you see that car last night? You know, that strange vehicle speeding through the village. I wish I could come off some of them, but social media for me is the big thing. It's gone from the one-to-ones. It's now all about social media. And, you know, a rhetorical question, how can you maintain discipline and stop people getting into trouble? Because it is what it is. And I'll stop there, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, it's a fascinating area, isn't it, for discussion, because social media is so intrusive. It is so beneficial in some ways, but nevertheless, it is intrusive because there's no escape from it. And I think you made some very good points there that when we are having meetings online and people are watching, they can see your every movement, really, as you said, any expression or any smile or anything like that, which can be misinterpreted. And since this chamber was built, almost 30 years ago, society has changed as well. It's not just COVID and the hybrid ways of working. Society as a whole has changed. The rules of engagement have changed, haven't they? People are much more challenging, much less accepting of authority. Perhaps there's much less respect for authority and institutions as well. And I think local government and local councils probably experience that as well, right at the front line, because you are there engaging with the population. And yes, I'm sure that has a profound effect on the way that you not only you feel about the roles and responsibilities that you have to discharge, but perhaps in some ways, to a certain extent, maybe a sense of helplessness that actually there's not a lot you can do about things like social media. So lots of really good points. Steve, would you like to?
Yeah, only briefly, just make another point on there that with challenges, and again, I'm sure my colleagues would echo this, is that we must remember every member of this authority, every councillor, is an individual with their own DNAs, their own challenges in their own lives, as well as their, because I used to say, I make excuses for my DNA. I say it was my father and my mother. That's where I came from. I can't change who I am, when I dress up on Christmas. People managing as group leaders is just as challenging. Within my group, there's a lot of larger than life characters, and I have to people manage each individual, and that can be time consuming. But I think what we're trying to do is commendable. We're trying to. I've got experience now. Alan's been here longer than me and Rob, but I got up to 17 years, and I don't know where the 17 years have gone, to be honest with you, but. So I've learned a lot, because if you saw me when I first came in here, it's not even for this meeting. You just don't know, do you? So I think it's more prevalent, and I'm not suggesting we keep saying new members, but they've had coming up to 3 years. But it is more important that new members get to understand exactly what is expected of them. And I think perhaps, and it's not for the standards committee, but I think perhaps overall within the council, and don't get me wrong, there is opportunities, but as I said in my own report, is that they may not be able to find that time or opportunities. I'm not saying they don't want to, but they can't. And so sometimes we cannot get the message across. Group leaders do a bit. And I think Craig said at the beginning, it's not our responsibility to monitor their behaviour. But that's all we can do is instill the values into that person from the outset, and we do that. I know the three of us leaders do that, and I know Helen, who's unfortunately not able to be here today, but she does it as well. So we do try, but it'll never be perfect, will it? Because of other mitigating factors. So I just want to say, people managing is also a huge challenge, I think. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Steve. People aren't robots, are they? And everybody is an individual. And we see, in the Standards Committee, we are seeing the whole suite of protocols and guidance, rules, if you like, that are there for members and are there to help you. And there is only so much that we can do as a committee, as you can do as an organisation, to give the right training. It's the, taking the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So we do have to keep on top of that, keep the training going, encouraging members to attend the training. And of course, there are certain training that members must have, otherwise they can't fulfill their duties. So in a certain extent, there are some sanctions there if you don't comply with the training. But it is about attitude and behaviour also, which is very, very difficult to regulate, and you can only do so much. I'm conscious of Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Taking training a step further, and what I said about the image that you get on the screen. Recently we've moved that if you're debating and you're voting, you've got to have your cameras on. A lot of people choose not to have their camera on. We very much go down the route, training-wise, of the do's and the don'ts and the rules. I'm wondering whether there's scope here to actually have NVC training and image training of what you perceive, because these now are accessible to members of the public. And if they can see, the image that I've always got in relation to the Jacob Rees-Mogg is him falling asleep on the benches of the Commons. And that is an everlasting. You can't take that away once you've seen that. But I don't think members fully appreciate, in my previous occupation, I was trained with non-verbal communication and, dare I say it, when people are lying and not telling you the truth and so on. But that non-verbal communication speaks volumes when other people are looking at you, whether you're interested, whether you as I said earlier, laughing and joking. And perhaps that is something as a specialist training area that we need to look at, is the image, because we all represent the council, the image that is perceived when you're looking up at these cameras, and members of the public could be looking at you. Just a thought.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. We are always looking for innovative ways to ensure that standards are upheld, and the points that you're making are absolutely spot on. So we will make a note of that. Thank you. Going to open it out to any other members of the committee if you'd like to make any observations, comments, questions. Yeah, Duncan.
Thank you all for your observations and comments. Having spent my professional life in the domain of incivility and disrespect at work, I was prompted to make some notes to myself as to how you see incivility and disrespect, because you talk, I think, in your reports, and it's certainly in the agenda of the Standards Committee, to promote civility and respect. But in order to understand civility and respect, you need to understand incivility and disrespect. I just wondered if you have any thoughts as to what incivility and disrespect may look like, because it's open to interpretation. And certainly in a lot of the work I've done, I ended up with a huge list of things, which I then had to distill down and boil down into the core of what incivility and disrespect might look like. So I just welcome some thoughts, really, because it might help us in terms of shaping training to tackle those sorts of issues. So I'll throw that open.
I'm happy to go first on that. I grew up in the 50s, 60s, in high deprivation up in the Dulles Valley there. I seen my parents with nothing. I grew up, I think parents, in what you're referring to, and like we see in now respect in our schools and everything, you can see it quite clearly that it starts at home, they say, but then teachers and training that we're talking about here, you don't know the difference. they called me a naughty boy. I spend more time out of the classroom than I did in the classroom. You know, so how I'm a council leader, I don't know, right? I just don't know. So it's about knowing where you came from. So I've gone through, you know, the naughty boy, seeing all this that I thought probably it was the norm, until I got to a certain age and educated enough to understand the difference, because I may not have had that opportunities from others because around me was all the same. So I think you are right. I think it's up to us now, isn't it, to not just as councils, I think it's a society thing, isn't it? I think we need to instill that knowledge and ability to for people to understand what anybody's trying to do. I think Rob made a good point about not just, I mean, Craig on the screen. I don't know if there is legislation, because I think in some of the meetings we have, and Rob has been in them previously, we used to always say to put the camera on as part of what we're supposed to be doing, but they still do not, and they say they got technical difficulties, etc. So therefore, they can get away with not being seen, going back on the suggestion of Rob anyway. But I think we've got to educate. We've got to be educators, and not just within our groups here. I think this is a society problem, and I haven't got the answers for it, but I think it starts obviously within the school, starts at home. But we got to try and get a respect. I've always said about respect campaign, etc. At a young age, and whatever we can do. I speak to Andrew Thomas and the Director of Education, because there's various groups and organisations and council directorates that maybe not just here can do that as well. We can all be part of it. There's a number of social events. You know, everything that goes on in society comes from people not understanding. And I can always talk about myself, because I sometimes write something, and like getting back to social media again, Jess, sorry, and then I get a lot of abuse. So I read it back and I go, oops, it's not what I meant to say. But you can read it in two different ways. And then a lot of that abuse, and then I tried to go back on to explain, no, I wasn't actually saying that. And so I think, again, but I'm sorry I've gone off on one, but I think the point you were making is that understanding where we are, or that civility you talk about, and respect, is what do we do with it? Where do we get to change? I don't think I got the answers, but I think education is critical, and for us all to do our own bit, you know, and I'm sure we will as leaders of groups anyway, but society has a lot to take on board as well. And where we get to in society, I don't know. So, but I totally agree with that question, and what do we do? So thank you for that.
Yes, yeah, yes, very good question, actually. How do we recognize incivility and, you know, and rudeness? I mean, I think one thing which I think is fortunate, within the authority itself, I think it's rare that we come across sort of examples of incivility and rudeness, and you know, we're aware, we do watch coverage of other authorities, and you know, sometimes things end up on "Have I got news for you?" and so on, which shows some quite spectacular scenes within councils or parliamentary chambers or whatever of you know, what you could call rude behaviour, I suppose, you know, or the type of language that's used. I mean, I think we're all probably more conscious, perhaps, than we would have been before of things, you know, because you know, but the impression that words can matter, and sometimes that, you know, we draw on the training or the awareness we have, for instance, of equalities, you know, that it makes a difference, that you understand that the way you talk to some people would be less acceptable if you're talking to you know, to other people. So I think that we are sort of generally fortunate in the way that things are conducted here. It does, yeah, it does very often come back to social media. I know we sound like we're going to be in a bonnet about social media, but it's such a huge part now of public life. You look at some of the things that are written. I think you mentioned, said, oh, there's brown envelopes and so on. I was reading some comment like that the other week, and sometimes you can brush it off, and sometimes you sort of say, well, would you like to explain or justify what you've just said? I don't always reply to these things. Sometimes that way lies madness, isn't it? If you reply to everything that gets said, and on rare occasions, I have blocked people that have put comments on Facebook posts, because I feel that they've gone beyond the pale. So somewhere or other there is a line that gets crossed. I mean, it'd be quite interesting because you mentioned that it's something that you had to recognise in previous occupation, and I'm just wondering what that is, because you made me really think now about this topic, and yes, and I'm sure we could do with advice on recognising, these things and knowing how and when we should be responding.
I go back. So my background is former ACAS professor. So workplace conflict, really. And the problem with things like culture and civility and respect is knowing where the boundaries are. Someone once trying to describe culture as trying to nail jelly to the wall. It is amorphous. It moves, it changes shape, direction, feel, and therefore trying to describe what culture should be, of which civility and respect is part of, is a very difficult task. Without waxing lyrical, I did a national study across the UK on the issue which embraced civility and respect, and we boiled it down to 13 behaviours. And if you breach those 13 behaviours, there lies the pathway to incivility and disrespect. Of course, it doesn't cover everything. But for example, one illustration would be gossip. So a culture that allows gossip is in itself disrespectful because it breeds. And people often don't think of gossip necessarily as disrespectful. But in an organization or in a group context, if you allow that to flourish, then it can lead to other problems. So there's a meshing of behaviors which link together. You've all said independently of each other, words matter, non-verbal communication matters, and both are right. The word on the page or an expression, cut or a raised eyebrow is sufficient to cause some concerns in the minds of others. So I think that there's a need to dig deep into this, to think about where the boundaries are, and what are the elements that compose respect and disrespect and civility and incivility. Because, you're right, so the society we live in today is not the society we all grew up in. And how we manage that is part of the challenge for us as a standards committee and for you leading your groups too. So that's my background in this, but I don't have all the answers, but I can shape some of the discussion.
Chair, that is very thought provoking, and I have to say, I'm trying to imagine, I'm trying to envisage how you'd have a group of 60 politicians without gossip, but it's.
Rob, would you like to add?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very last thing, apart from your second point, very last thing that you said was the line got crossed. It depends who's writing that line and where that line is to the individual before it gets crossed. We talked about the way that we operate, and society in here has changed on a political basis. Society has changed out there, irrespective of political basis. I didn't realise that Steve and myself are almost the same age. I've weathered far better than Steve has, because I was raised in the 50s and 60s. I never heard anyone use the F word at all. You walk down the street now, any time, any day, morning, dinner time, evening, you've got young children using the F word because it's become part of their culture, it's become part of their language. They see nothing wrong with it, and yet it's only one of two words that can be used for indecent language in a criminal code. So society has slowly eroded that line being pushed further and further, and that line has been crossed because it's now become the norm to F and blind when you're walking down the street, no matter how old you are. And it's about people's perception in relation to where that line is. What would offend me may not offend you, and vice versa. And then if you take that a stage further, bullying. I may shout because I've got a penchant occasions for shouting, so my wife tells me. But there's nothing meant with the aggression behind it. Someone could class that as bullying because it's that perception. I may something that I don't think is offensive, but someone else may think is offensive because of their circumstances. If you look at the rise of the far right and the extremists, we've just had elections in Germany and France, and the far right extremists have a way of life that they think is acceptable when the majority of society find it unacceptable. We are guided by legislation in relation to what is inequality and what is equality. But the difficulty I think we have as leaders is who draws that line and what have you got to do to go over it? And it's very difficult. I'd be interested to see the reasons you said with that study of what is perceived by ACAS as these inequalities and equalities, to give some idea of what a professional body is looked at in relation to the guidance of that. And I think that would be good for us to have that list, to give us an idea, or if it's contained in a report, to certainly have a link to that we could look at it and then we can make judgment calls in relation to giving us a better steer as to a professional body's opinion of equality and inequality compared to our own perception. And I think that's what we always come back to. What do we think is inequality? What do we think is fair and right? And that's down to individuals, I'm afraid. But I think everyone in this room and online knows when something's wrong. And that's when we as leaders have got to act.
Absolutely, Rob. Thank you. And we may not be able to draw the lines outside of council, but we can certainly draw the lines within council, can't we? Which is a critical role for us all. Just going to bring Craig in because I think he would like to say a couple of words at this point.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. Just a point that I was picking up on following Duncan's question and obviously some of the responses then that had been received. It's interesting, one of the issues was raised about who is the arbiter of making that determination. And ironically, it would come down to probably the Standards Committee at different times then as well, because what we would probably see is if there was an occasion where somebody made a complaint regarding a certain comment ultimately that would be made, it would be then probably referred on to the Ombudsman's office, who may decide whether or not they wish to investigate it or not, applying the usual criteria that they do. And then once that report is ultimately prepared and produced, it would come back here to the Standards Committee to help make that final determination. But the task before you is very difficult at that point, because as well as looking at the issues obviously of civility and the impact ultimately that any statements could have, you also have to balance against it that individual's right to particular freedoms of speech, which are enshrined obviously in some of the European Convention rights that we do have. So it's hard then at that point not to take what your own judgments ultimately could be in that scenario, in line then with what the guidance, the legislation, or the various different cases are ultimately testing. So it's a very, very difficult balance ultimately to make. And some of the biggest challenges that standards committees have seen in recent years have been those cases where you are asked to balance the the right for the ability to have that freedom of speech against the offence maybe that it's ultimately been caused. So it's certainly not an easy task, and it's one that can cause standards committees a lot of trouble when it comes to looking at whether a sanction should be imposed.
Can I
Thank you, Craig.
come back and just add one thing?
Yeah.
I read about a slander and defamation case that was in America, and the person was sued for defamation and slander. And when it got to the court, they actually pleaded guilty. And the judge said to the individual, we've got a copy of what you said in this case, but I want you to handwrite it. Before I make a decision on punishment, I want you to handwrite what you actually said and post it online and what have you, which the defendant actually did. And then the judge gave them the piece of paper back and said, on your way home tonight, I want you to rip this piece of paper up into the smallest amount of papers that you could possibly have. And as you are driving home to your home, before you come back for sentence tomorrow, I want you to throw these bits of paper out of the window as you go in and think about what you said. When the defendant came back into court the following day, the judge said, right, did you do what I said? Yes. He said, I now want you to travel along the same route and pick up all these bits of paper that you've ripped up, that you said, and thrown out the window. And the defendant said, well, that's impossible. I'd never be able to find all those small bits of paper. And the judge was trying to make the point that you may regret saying it, you may feel sorry for saying it, and you will try and apologize to bring it back. But once it's out there, and you cannot ever take those words back. And I thought it was a very good monologue in relation to what people say, and then they regret saying it at a later date.
Thank you, Rob. That's a really good story. I think Carolyn, sorry, you're wanting to come in?
Yes, just very briefly, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you to the leaders, a very excellent discussion and presentation. And I totally agree with everything that's been said. I just wanted to say really that this committee has looked, as Craig has just said, at the work of the Ombudsman and the way social media affects councillors. And I think to go back to Alan's point as well about sort of bullying, there's no right to reply for councillors, and we've been told we should have a thick skin, which I know we've discussed in committee, which we don't agree with. But you know, there is no right to reply to these people when they abuse you online, and I think that's one of the hardest parts as well. I think I managed to control myself for not posting stuff, but the right to reply, we haven't got that, and this is why, you know, public, they can say what they like about us, but we don't have that right to reply. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, ultimately, councillors are human beings, and it is about respect, isn't it? And when you have these comments made against you, you would really like to ask the people who are saying them, please flip it around. Would you like me to say that about you? And that's what gets lost, isn't it? When people think they can say or do what they like. Any other comments and questions? Wayne?
Yeah, I just want to thank the three group leaders. I am one of a number of councillors who came in at the last election, very wet behind the ears. And I just want to say thank you, particularly to Steve as our group leader and leader of the council, for his patience. We are a mixed batch, as he said earlier. And amongst every mixed batch, there are loose cannons and what have you. But I'm sure what I say to Steve is the same for Alan and for Rob and for Helen. It is a difficult job. And I just want to acknowledge, thank you for all they do, particularly to encourage new members to get involved and to explain everything. I didn't even know how to work a tablet, to be honest with you. And Steve was so personable at the time. He even came to my house to show me how to do it. Is that right? And, you know, I'm so grateful for that. It sounds as if I'm crawling, I know, but I'm not. It's just simply to say that what they have said is factual. They're not making it up. And I just want to say thank you to the group leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. And I think that's a really good point to draw the conclusion to an end, except Steve would like to come in.
Yeah, just briefly, and thank Wayne for that. And I'm sure each leader of groups will respect that and understand what Wayne is saying. And it's encouraging to hear that we are trying to help our new members and current members. I just want to ask you one question. I mean, in civility and respect, and I totally agree, respect is critical. It's about a reaction, isn't it? I think Caroline sort of touched on what I was going to ask you. It's always they're out there, social media and through many platforms, as Rob highlighted. It's about a reaction from an individual, whether you're a councillor or not, really, I suppose. And that's where it gets out of control on social media. And we know the police can't police social media because it's far too complicated. But I just wondered, under your own roles and the individual sometimes may have his own the pandemic, personal things going on in their lives. You know, sometimes like I touched on earlier, because I'm an example of reacting before thinking. That sort of then can lead, because of who you are, to a request to the Ombudsman or to the Standards Committee or whatever. And I just wondered where, it's very grey area on the language or the responses used. And Craig is an exceptional officer in dealing with all of it. I don't know how he manages, because any time of night, any day, Craig is always there. So we're lucky to have him here in Neath Talbot. But I just wondered, it's the confidence, sort of like Caroline was touching on, how you actually react, because I don't want to encourage all members to bombard Craig on a conversation that's being had, but that's the worry. We go in so far, and if we pick on the political side, because elections will be coming up in the Senate in 2 years' time, the far right, Rob touched on earlier, and reform and everything, it's all going to happen, isn't it? We're going to enter into a bit of a goldfish bowl where all this toxicity is going to start happening, and we sometimes will be caught up in the middle of this. So knowing our levels of what we are experienced, but there's other members, and those may be candidates or whatever from parties. I don't want to create well, not me personally, but I don't want something being created across Neath Talbot that becomes unmanageable. So I don't know. I'm not asking for a response today about going away and thinking from your perspective as standards to give advice, because it's going to be quite important with what's coming, I fear, because I'm already seeing it, because I'm probably one of the most active members of social. Rob talked about my age. I'm down with the kids, as they say. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, you name a platform, I'm on it. And I see all these conversations, all the videos and the propaganda and the actual violence and hatred, and so that society has got to. It's not pleasant. Not saying I dwell on it or look at it, but I think for us as members, all of us, with experience or not, I think a bit of guidelines, perhaps from going away, getting into a political election mode I'm talking about now. We're all good friends here today, but when the elections come, see Rob grinning now, but that's what happens, isn't it? You need still to be civil, but I'm sure Craig can give you examples of what happens at election time, we need to be prepared for that. That's all. Sorry I held up your meeting, and I know you've got plenty of business to carry on with.
No, absolutely not. I think it's a very important point, and I'm sure Craig will give that some thought, because it is going to be a very tense time, isn't it, in terms of elections, and it's very easy to respond emotionally. And I think because one of the questions I was going to ask you was about the workshop and the guidelines that we produced on social media, and there's lots of really good helpful tips in that, and one of them is about taking time to respond, and I think is very quickly to respond quickly. And when you respond quickly, it's about your emotional response, because that's what comes to the fore straight away. But you need to step back and let it subside, and let it, that cold shower to come back and to think more calmly and rationally before you actually jump in. But Craig, would you like to just...
Of course, actually, I can think of one or two examples, certainly during the pre-election period, which is always a very interesting time with some of the emails that I do get. And it's something, actually, I think the Standards Committee itself have actually picked up as something we would like to look at in a little bit more detail. So one of the things which we've commented on previously is that as elected members going into an election, you were still bound by your code of conduct. You still have all of those various responsibilities in place, whereas candidate X, who is standing, is not bound ultimately to anything. So the ability to have controls in respect of the behaviour of non-councillors is something that perhaps we've got a little bit of lack of power to be able to deal with. But we take quite a zero tolerance approach here in MPT, that if we see something that is of concern, the returning officer will always forward it on to South Wales Police and our representative there, who will then make a determination whether they wish to action it or not. So we always try to make sure that if things are brought to our attention, if we can act, we will. If we can't, we pass it on ultimately to other organisations. However, one of the work programmes that we have picked up is that sometimes people who wish to stand ultimately for council, whether that's town community councils, county borough councils, don't have an idea of the framework in which they will have to act when they do ultimately become elected, because they don't realise that they will be bound by a code of conduct, that they will have certain restrictions that are being placed on them. So what we're going to try and look to do is create a little bit of a guidance note which we can give to potential candidates who wish to stand. It can be available on our website as we look at the BA councillor and the various processes following that, just to make it clear that the code of conduct is something that from day one you will have to be aware of and you will have to be complying with. What we also did as well, I don't know if you remember, back in 2022 we had the civility in I can't remember the full name of it, the civility in elections protocol, which obviously all council members ultimately signed. But again, this is council members, this is political parties within the council. We can't control ultimately those people who are going to be standing outside. So all we can do is just make sure you as elected members have the support and how to deal with those matters, which we've been trying to do by some of the training opportunities and material that we provided, and some other work which we are doing under our Democratic Services Committee umbrella. And just make sure you've got all that necessary support that you can to how you manage it and deal with it if it does come your way.
Rob.
Yeah, just finish on one thing, because it has been an interesting discussion, and when we get political fever, things do go crazy. But coming back to what Duncan said earlier, for those of us either literally or of an age, Napoleon in George Orwell's Animal Farm, for those who have seen or read the book or seen the animation, drew up a list of rules on the outside of the building, and one of the rules was all animals are equal. And underneath that was written about a week later, but some animals are more equal than others.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you all very much for your attendance today. We can see that you do take your responsibilities extremely seriously, and you are working extremely hard to help to maintain standards, but also to support people and to give the right advice and guidance for people who perhaps are not aware of things. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. I think the key points that are coming out is around training, but it is around the behavioural issues, and some very good points there. Duncan has raised perhaps what could be a very helpful contribution in terms of the work that you did, which would be good to share with the committee and with yourselves as well, because that sounds as though it could be very helpful, and give us an insight into what further training would be helpful for members, because it's not just about training on the legislation and about what is expected in that regard, but it is about about that interaction between people and what is acceptable or not. So we're here to help you. So any suggestions that you can give us as to what you would like to see from the Standards Committee going forward, that would certainly help us in our role. And I think it's been very helpful to have more of an informal discussion. I hope you agree with that. And we look forward to next year. But in the meantime, there will be work still to do. And with the elections coming up next year, perhaps greater learning from that as well. Great. Sorry.
Point, if I may. I think you need to sell us. I spoke to Craig about this as well. People are scared and frightened. I think we were all coming in here again. I don't know what it is. It's the name, I suppose, the Standards Committee and the Public Ombudsman. I think you are here to help. You are here to advise. You are here to make councillors better councillors. So I think perhaps something through Democratic Service, Craig, or something, we still need to get the Standards Committee, the knowledge for members and others, what your roles really are. And I know we get it, but I think it'd be better for all members to, I think you've had a seminar on it as well, Craig, but not to be afraid of Standards Committee, because they all go, I'm being reported to the Standards Committee. And you just sort of go, oh, no, what have I done? What have I done? So I think you all working hard, and those that have been on this committee previously as well. So keep up the good work. But let's explain what the Standards Committee actually is here for, rather than the perception of the Standards Committee. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's
then,
quite
Chair.
all right.
Thank
Although
you.
we don't want to remove that perception too far, because we don't want to become too friendly. No, but seriously, it is that balance, isn't it? And yes, we do have a job to do. You have a job to do, and your job is contributing really to our role as well. And there are certain tasks that you have to do which may or may not be as nice as others, and we all know what they are, and it's the same for the Standards Committee as well. Craig, is there anything you would like to say before we let the leaders go?
No, just thank you for myself, and no doubt the chair will as well. Thank you for your attendance at today's meeting. Fortunately, I've got a very, very positive relationship with all group leaders here in Neath Talbot, and on the whole, we don't have the level of issues which I know some of my colleagues and other authorities ultimately do. So for that, I consider myself extremely grateful. I've always found you very cooperative and willing to listen to the alternative views and the points that I put forward, and you've always been very quick ultimately to refer officers or members to myself as part of that process, because we do want to try and resolve any issues ultimately before they develop. That's the key approach in which I work on. I think picking up the point that the leader just mentioned, I think we are very conscious about what we call dispelling the myths of Standards Committee to make you more understandable to what the work of members do. Earlier on in this year, we did have a session where a number of individual members attended and had an opportunity to meet the committee and just have some general discussions. We're going to be redoing that again in our next meeting, so I'll be coming back to you to ask a few additional nominees to come forward as well. So the more we can get that working relationship between the Standards Committee and all members, the better, in my view. So just thank you very much on my part.
Good. Thank you all very much. I know you've got lots of work to do, so thank you very much for your time, and we do appreciate it. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Our next item is a review of the member officer protocol.
There we go. Thank you very much, Chair. So I was looking at our officer member protocol a couple of weeks ago, and I felt it could need a little bit of enhancement in respect of various different parts. So I've done some updates to the draft, and my intention was to produce to you this revised draft today, and I was going to explain to you the nature of the changes that I was ultimately promoting, and then the reasons ultimately why. So what I would propose to do, Chair, is I'll just do a quick whistle-stop tour of what the new protocol is saying, and I'll explain the nature of the changes that I've made so you can understand why I was doing them in that extent. So we've just just got an introduction setting out what the basis of our member officer protocol is. You will have seen various reports on this previously. It's just an important document trying to fulfil the obligations that officers and members must work together for the benefit of the people of Neath Talbot, and each have respective roles to play. And it's very important that never the twain shall meet and everyone knows specifically what their overarching functions should be. So I've just tried to emphasize what the role of a member is and what specific task they have to undertake. And then we have the role of officers. What I was conscious, though, we didn't have a lot of information on is about dealing with potential disputes, if there could be an issue. Fortunately, we don't have them a lot here in Neath Talbot, but if we were ever into the scenario where there was a dispute between an officer and a member, or there was an allegation, perhaps that they'd failed to show each other respect and consideration, what would be the process ultimately in which we would have to try and deal with that? So I've tried to set out a little bit of a forum there to enable us to take that forward. But I thought it was very important as well to make sure, as we've heard earlier on, the role of the group leader is enshrined in this process as well, because given the ability to try and promote within their group, it's very key that they play an important role ultimately in respect of any potential dispute if it arises. Try to emphasize some of the points about respect and courtesy and what that could ultimately mean, and just try to bolster a few points in respect of undue pressure and about the importance of familiarity never crossing. So everyone knows that there is a professional relationship at the heart of the role between member and officers. Trying to make sure as well that all members are aware that they have a right to access documents, and officers shouldn't necessarily restrict that process. One of the key aspects for me, something I sometimes find, is that officers don't realise actually we don't just serve a cabinet, we serve all 60 elected members. So it's important to be aware that if a member needs a specific document of a specific issue to enable them to fulfill their functions, there is an entitlement. We've got various other policies and corporate documents that exist within our constitution, but I just wanted to emphasize that there to set out the importance of us providing that information and what the level of service is that we can support. Making sure as well that all our sort of non-cabinet members are involved in matters that are in relation to their respective wards. So if there was a consultation, for example, ongoing in respect of a local community issue, making sure that our elected members are aware of something going on in our ward and placing an onus on officers to put that information forward. And also as well, if there was an event ultimately going on within a particular ward, that maybe it's a proposal that the cabinet have been working on, still the local member is ultimately included. So to cement that relationship between the cabinet and our backbenchers and local ward members. Emphasising the position on confidentiality, so just a few minor little changes there, just to make sure that where information is provided to a member by an officer, if it's marked as confident, they will keep it as confident. We've obviously got our code of conduct, which covers off the main obligations in respect of when information is provided in there, but just a little bit just to emphasise it in that regard. A little bit of clarification about the level of support ultimately that we can provide members, just to emphasise that we are there to help them fulfil their basic functions as members and their general duties. We're not there to support them in all aspects of their approach and working arrangements. Political restrictions, just emphasising, of course, that we as officers, some of us could be under political restrictions where we can't stand for political parties or we can't impact in some of the ways that political parties do then as well. So fundamentally, it's not changing any of the provisions that were in place from the previous document. It's just a little few enhancements that I thought could just tidy up a few loose ends and give us some forums going forward. So happy to take any questions, Chair. But what I would look to do is once Standards Committee have endorsed it or suggested any changes, we'll take it through then the final decision-making process, because it's a document that full council will need to vote on at the appropriate time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Craig. And it was although we've seen it before, it was useful to have the protocol again, because again it reminds us about where standards actually and ethics prevail right across the council, regardless of what area we're talking about. So really helpful to have that and to see the changes. So any comments or observations, Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. If I can draw colleagues' attention to items 4.5 to 410. So this is in the document, page 29, dealing with disputes. So in 4.5, the third line says may resolve to consider mediation. And then if you go to 410, it says both parties will be expected to agree and engage with mediation. So it's almost a contradiction in terms, yeah? Because in 4.9, it says there will be an expectation that both parties will, in the spirit of the protocol, engage in meaningful discussion. So two of the points are saying this is the direction of travel, but the earlier point says maybe. So I think that could be a tidy up. The thing I'm a bit puzzled by is 4.7. The way it's phrased, forgive me, Craig, but it sort of flies in the face of conventional wisdom, at least in most organisations I've had experience with, because it says if an officer feels that he or she has not been properly treated with respect and courtesy by a member, she should raise the matter with her head of service, who will notify the relevant director. Now, I don't know, this may be ignorance on my part, but my understanding is normally if there's a dispute between two individuals, you try and get them together, talking to each other to resolve the issue. If this protocol says you're going to notify your head of service, who in turn is going to escalate it up to the relevant director, that's the inference I'm reading into it, then expecting mediation is likely to be a much bigger ask, because you followed a chain of command in notification, and yet you're going to expect two people to come together and say, okay, can we sort this out? Do you see where I'm coming from in this? Now, it may be, in my ignorance here, this is because of the complexity of a member and an officer, and there's a need to protect one from speaking to the other. I don't know, so excuse my ignorance on that, but that's my puzzle really in this 4.7.
No, I can see where you come from in that sense. I think the issue probably from the way I look at it is we obviously, as a member in that sense, they are subject to a very different type of regime with very different processes. And whereas you consider a usual employment-related matter between two officers, yes, I agree with you in that sense as part of the process. But because there are a number of additional issues that have to be taken into account because of code of conduct, whether it's ombudsman related, whether it's standards committee related, whether there's other members ultimately, but sometimes it does require that little bit of a trigger. But no, I take your point that it could do a bit of clarity in that regard. So I'm wondering, I just need to tidy up the language there potentially. So the fact that I knew what I was trying to say, but if you're looking at it in that sense from an objective outsider's perspective, it may cause that ambiguity as to what it would be. So I think that 4.7 does need to be revised slightly in that it's at a lesser level before it triggers to that next stage ultimately of the mediation, to see if there are opportunities to try and resolve in some format. So I'll play about with that wording and see if I can come up with something slightly different that hopefully just reflects your view there.
Also, Craig, I think we have to recognise that within it's a lot similar to the points that you were making. With local government, there is a sort of a different way of dealing with things because of the elected member side and the officer side. So, and you could have a head of a manager who is quite a junior at a junior level. And it would not be appropriate for that officer to deal with the members because they haven't got the right level of authority. So therefore, in some ways, it has to be escalated up so that you are operating at that same level. And it is very much around that, I think, but also about protecting junior officers as well. Am I right in saying that? It's
very much so,
dynamic in where you have elected members and officers working together.
Thank you for the explanation. I guess that was the case. The difficulty, I think, is if you are raising it, and I take your point, Chair, about the junior, perhaps, manager of an officer, is as soon as it starts to climb the hierarchy, it's a bit like Pandora's box. It's much more difficult to put it back in the box and deal with it. So I think it possibly on a case-by-case basis is worth considering, rather than it being a protocol of a one-size-fits-all. Simply because if I felt that it was being escalated to a higher order, and I'm on the receiving end of the accusation, then that's going to faze me a little. But I do take your point. There's an unusual complexity to this compared to a conventional organisation. But yeah, I just think maybe spelling it out in a little more clarity, I think, might help. And on a case-by-case basis, because there are going to be situations where there are going to be minor indiscretions that need not involve directors of service. But yeah, thank you for the explanation anyway.
Any other comments or observations?
Yeah, just an observation. Craig, I just wonder if you could answer it for me. 7.4, when I read that, I felt that the language used at the towards the end of the sentence was quite confusing. It talks about as well as consulting the monitoring officer where there is doubt about virus. As a lay person, I found myself wondering what that meant. And I'm just wondering if clarity could be offered there for ease of reading.
Absolutely. I think I'm so used to talking about the issue of vives, whether something is intra-vives, ultra-vives, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you forget the target audience that comes with it. So yes, we can say that there's a doubt about whether the council has the power to act, which is what it comes down to. So I'll make that correction.
Lovely. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Alison. That's helpful. Any other comments? Trying to see online. No, nothing. Good. Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Craig. I think it's actually the last sentence, which sort of follows on from what we were talking about with the group leaders. And I think, this says it all really, that mutual understanding, openness and respect are the greatest safeguard of the integrity of the council, its members and officers. And I thought how true really is that sentence. And if everybody could live by that principle, wouldn't life be easy? Or certainly the life of the Standards Committee would be, wouldn't it? We can but dream. Craig, thank you very much. We note your report and the changes, and as you say, it will be taken forward for approval at council. Yeah. Do we have to do anything? I'm just looking for the recommendation.
Just to note that you're happy with it.
Yes. And we note, may I have your approval that we note the report? Thank you very much. Thank you. Next item is the local resolution procedure update. Again, over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So I brought the local resolution process to you on a number of occasions in the past, obviously to demonstrate that we have this process in place, and we do encourage all members ultimately to be aware of it in case they ever wish to go down that route of trying to resolve a dispute in this regard. When I was looking at the latest version of it ready to bring to you at this meeting, I noticed it could benefit from a couple of small amendments. You'll have seen, for example, in paragraph 20 on my report, I talk about a High Court case that came out of various matters, so I felt it important ultimately that we reflect some of that. And there have been some discussions taking place on a national level at the moment in respect of the local resolution process, with one of the suggestions being a national document ultimately be prepared, which each authority then adopts for itself instead of there being bespoke models within the whole 22 local authorities. I think it was interesting that when I was looking at some of the different documents out there, the differences in approaches that people ultimately take with the protocols and when it's used, when it cannot be used. So the protocol itself that we have is attached at Appendix 1, and there are just some introductory paragraphs at the start, which I've just underlined, just so you can see the changes ultimately again that I was proposing. Just the key points ultimately for you to be aware of. It says matters suggest that a breach of the code in respect of declarations of interest, bullying, disreputable conduct should be referred to the PSOW for consideration. They're not really suitable for local resolution processes. One of the questions sometimes I have been asked is, well, what is actually suitable to go through a local resolution? Because whilst a member may think it's very significant, I would say, well, actually, maybe it's too significant ultimately for this process. A member may think it's relatively minor, and I'd say, well, actually, no, this is something that the PSOW will need to consider. So trying to just give a little bit of guidance, because because you don't want to close the door to anything being considered under it, but just making it clear that some things are too significant ultimately because they call into question the integrity of the councillor, the role of the councillor, particularly about things like declarations of interest and bullying, which is a much more significant behavioural issue as far as I'm concerned. And then I basically said that the local resolution procedure is drafted on the basis that the complainant and the subject of the complaint agree to participate. However, if it was the case ultimately that a complaint is led to the PSOW, we have to bring that local resolution process to a stop because obviously it wouldn't be appropriate for both avenues to be running at the same time. And also as well that no decision under a local resolution procedure can oust the ombudsman's role. They have to be a final arbiter in this sense. So whilst you may go through the local resolution process and have an outcome, the ombudsman may decide something totally different if they were going to be considerate. And similarly, if it was referred back to the Standards Committee, you will not be bound ultimately from any outcomes of a local resolution process. So if you felt it was more serious, then that's warrant something further down the line, that will always ultimately be in your gift as part of this process. So just two very small amendments, but just that it would be beneficial to just tidy up the document a little bit, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions? Alison.
Sorry, Craig, just one thing at the beginning of the document. You talk about the scope of the procedure and then you go on to say that the council members have adopted this protocol. Again, I think it's just the language. So if that could be changed to procedure.
Of course I can, no problem at all.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one, Craig. Is just as you have very helpfully inserted what is not appropriate for the local resolution procedure, is there anywhere that says what is, that gives an example of what is?
There's nothing actually written in any documentation, but I can certainly put a few examples in there as to the type of elements that we've been told should give consideration to it. So yes, I can easily come up with some examples there that could hopefully give that indication, Joe.
Yeah, just think that would be helpful, really. Duncan.
Yeah, sometimes a little flow diagram. So a yes, no, arrow pathway. So you'd say, you know, does it qualify under this set of criteria? If yes, go next step. If no, go this way. And a little flow diagram can sometimes be helpful in directing people to the right path to where this needs to go.
Absolutely fine, no problem at all. I will hijack one of my business support officers because the last time I tried to create a flow chart, it just went incredibly awry. But I will tell my business support what I needed to say, and they will no doubt be able to create one for me.
Thanks, Craig. Yes, often a pictorial representation of lots of words is very helpful, isn't it? Yes, yeah, good. Thank you. So we may have your formally approve. Yes, thank you very much. Next item is the Standards Committee Forum. This is the National Standards Committee Forum.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So just as members be aware previously, a national forum has now been created, which the chairs of the 22 local authorities attend on a biannual basis. Our chair attended the last one in June this year. So just in the interest of transparency, bringing the minutes back to all members so they've got an opportunity to see them. To hopefully, if there's any particular points that raise any issues, we do get an agenda that's provisionally forwarded to us earlier on before the next meeting, so we can certainly see if there's any points to raise. A couple of points just for me to highlight. I think it's interesting that they took a report on the adjudication panel for Wales. We did bring our own report ultimately to the Standards Committee earlier on this year, but specifically what the role of the adjudication panel ultimately was. They received a report from One Voice Wales, and I think it was a good idea to show the level of support that they ultimately provide town and community councils and the various roles that they can play. The Ombudsman talked about some of their statistics, and we'll see the NPT elements now specifically in our next report. There is a reference, of course, to the Ombudsman's independent review that they've recently undertaken. And for those members who may not have seen it, that report now has been published by the PSOW, which found that there were no systemic issues ultimately within the Ombudsman in respect of that. I will circulate a copy of the report for our members ultimately to see it, but it is available online and it was published just a week or two ago. They recommended a review of local resolution procedures, hence the reason I started looking at ours. and they're going to start talking a little bit more about group leaders' duties in due course, and no doubt some of the points that we've raised today could be fed back. But I'm conscious, Chair, whether there's anything else you wanted to add from your attendance at the meeting, if there was anything you found beneficial.
Well, actually, I didn't attend because I wasn't well. I was last minute, so my apologies to Tom for not bringing you in, and it was very much last minute. So I didn't attend. But they are usually very informative, and I thought it was interesting. Judge Sharp's comments around setting out decision, which I thought was good, which we can apply to, and we do apply to any not investigation, but any is it investigation? Is that the right word? Yes, that we do, and yes, it's setting out the ensuring the key points and findings of fact, the arguments that are put forward, and what led us to that decision. It's just that very structured decision-making process which we follow.
Indeed, and I think every monitoring officer is scared of being challenged on the basis that your decision isn't in the appropriate format. So I quite religiously follow the template that the adjudication panel gave. So hopefully then it's not going to be my fault if anything goes awry ultimately at that person.
I think it's an approach that certainly Alison and I would recognise from course, and Tom from the police, and that's what you do, and Duncan as well, that's what you do when you are investigating these kind of issues.
Yes, I don't get creative in the slightest. I like to follow those.
Absolutely, and you can't go wrong then. So thank you very much for that. I think we may have circulated the Ombudsman, the report from the inquiry already, but yes, so yes, perhaps people will have got lost in people's inboxes, so that would be helpful. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So we note the documents from the Standards Committee. Thank you. Then the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales, their annual report. Craig.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So I'm conscious this may be the first time for some members ultimately see this report, or we may have had one last year. I can't remember, but every year the Ombudsman issues an annual report bespoke to each individual authority, which looks at the various different complaints ultimately that they have been referred in the past, in the previous year. So it covers off the service-based complaints for the most part, which identifies if an individual has not been happy with the service that the council has received, how that process has been dealt with. But they now include a specific section in respect of code of conduct related complaints, and just to highlight some overarching statistics in that regard. So just a sort of highlight point to give you in respect of that code of conduct element, given it relates to your work area. The number of national code of conduct complaints increased slightly in 2023-2024 in respect of local authority elected members. In the Neath Talbot locality, the number of complaints against county borough councillors was low, there being just 8, and in each case bar one, the PSOW referred that there was no case to answer. One, however, was referred to our Standards Committee, which you considered at a previous meeting, which led to you suspending that councillor for a period of 4 calendar months. In addition, there was a decrease in the number of complaints against town and community councils, councillors going from 11 down to 4, but in each of those cases, no further action was taken in respect of these matters, and they were either closed after initial consideration, discontinued, or withdrawn. So it's the figures for 23-24. It's the important element to be aware of there. So it's looking back previously. But overall, I think we can take some assurance that our level of work is, and the level of complaint ultimately is low. And we do, of course, have a number of ongoing processes and hopefully to try and reduce this down as much as possible as well. And we do a lot of that, for example, through the work of the Standards Committee, the training package we put in place for members, the guidance ultimately we've been issued. But I also do a lot of work as well, linking in with some of our town and community council clerks to obviously have in the forum, which we need to revisit a date for, to give them the opportunity to voice any concerns. And as we see from some future reports, the Standards Committee engaging and attending various meetings that the council undertake that way as well. So always an ongoing stream of work to make sure that where possible, we keep that number as low as we can, Chair. But happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thanks, Craig. I think when you read the report and the annual letter, which came to the leader, and you see that the Ombudsman deals with 10,000 complaints a year, that's an astonishing number. and a 37% increase in caseload in 5 years. That is an incredible statistic too, isn't it? And it does really bring home to us how important the work of the Standards Committee is in ensuring that we do maintain standards. Because again, I think the low numbers from Neath but Talbot reflects the work that does the positive work that goes on within the council, and the teamwork really that is created to ensure standards are maintained. So I think we have to look at that as really positives. Any questions or comments from Carolyn?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it just looking at this report, and as you just said, now the number of cases that the Ombudsman has to deal with, it's the same situation with the Audit Office of Wales. They're complaining about the number of audits that they have to undertake, being short of staff. And I think my sort of, the way I'm coming at this is, it's not our fault that they're short of staff. It's the fault of Welsh Government, who are not perhaps putting enough money or enough staff into these areas. Sometimes, I mean, particularly with audit, local town and community councils have suffered a little bit at the hands of the auditor through no fault of their own. So I'm just wondering if this is something that we could take up with them as well, because that is not local council's fault. Do you understand what I'm saying? Did I make myself clear then?
Yes, absolutely. I know I see exactly where you're coming from, and it's a similar issue, obviously, across the board in respect of public services at the moment. The funding elements associated with them, the constraints that the Ombudsman are finding are similar constraints across the board in all regulators. The volume of work which regulators are now seeing in various different ways, having sufficient resources ultimately to be able to staff it. So no, I think the point is very well made. Yeah.
Thanks, Carolyn. Couple of questions from me, Craig. Just in terms of the recommendations, I suppose, going forward, are there any call-outs for you from that suggested improvement work for 24-25? I think the easy to read guide seems a very positive one, I thought.
Very much so, Chair. I think, sorry, I just put it up on screen here. Which always goes slow whenever you're on demand, isn't there, to be able to find things. But yeah, I think for me, ultimately, the guidance is the key element, and also looking at the work programme, obviously, that we as a Standards Committee have been trying to promote and to make sure that those aspects are particularly there. I think about making sure that we are continuing ultimately to engage with our town and community councils and the programme that we're going to be looking at there, because I think we always focus very heavily on the code of conduct matters for our county borough councillors, because I deal with them, for example, on a regular basis, but making sure if there's any additional elements that the Standards Committee can help look at in respect of town and community councils would be an important factor there. And just continuing, obviously, in the work that we're doing at the moment. I think what we found in the last 2 to 3 years in particular is our Standards Committee has now changed its approach, rather it being more looking at the sort of post elements and where matters are referred to us. We'll be much more positive and proactive in trying to generate documentation, try and generate that support and guidance, which we think we can help to remember. So it's just continuing on that front at the moment.
Thanks, Craig. Are there any recommendations or improvement actions remaining from last year? Are they all completed?
All complete at this stage. Obviously, a lot of them are still ongoing because we try to make sure that it gives them breathe and it continues in that sense. But the elements that we've put in place still continue.
Yes. Lots of things have to be dynamic, don't they? They're changing, so they're never going to be, start and finish, are they? And that's the whole point of things, of improvement, isn't it? It's a continuous process. You don't just do it once, you do it on a regular basis. Thank you, Craig. So we formally note and accept the report. Thank you very much. Then the next item is attendance at council and town and community council meetings. Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I mentioned in previous meetings, obviously, one of the opportunities you have as Standards Committee members is you can either go out to visit some town and community councils to see ultimately how those meetings are conducted and the member issues ultimately associated there. But I'm also conscious as well that the invite also extends to our County Borough Council meetings. So if you felt that you wish to sit in on a council meeting to see how they are structured, how they work, and what the general behavioural issues are like, you are, of course, more than welcome ultimately to do so at the same time. So rather than be a sort of narrow it down where, say, for example, everyone picks one meeting that they wish to attend, what I thought I would do is I would give you to the dates of all of our meetings of County Borough Councils, all of the meetings of the town and community councils that are taking place in the area, and if there are some ones that fit in with your availability or your dates, you are welcome to try and select them. And what I would suggest is if you've got a particular one you'd like to go to, drop me a line. I'll liaise with the clerk for you to try and sort out the invite, and you can try and pick something that ultimately works for you. So that was the reason we put in quite a detailed calendar in. There is no compulsion ultimately to attend. It is purely optional in that sense, but of course they're there and an opportunity for you. I would recommend maybe at some point you may wish to consider coming to see a County Borough Council meeting if you've not seen one previously, because you can sometimes get a very different feel ultimately in the room as to how some of the behavioural issues could work, what the role of members are in those processes, and it can help frame then obviously the types of issues that you're considering when matters are referred to you if you've seen how these meetings function in due regard. I've included the feedback sheet that we utilised last time. Happy to amend if any members want to ask additional questions or they feel that there are additional evidence that they wish to try and collect as part of the process. But it's not meant to be anything sort of rigid where you've got a critique or you've got a comment on. It's just a guidance note for you, for example, the types of issues which I think could be important. And I think it's just more beneficial you go, you attend, and you see how these meetings function, and then feedback any particular thoughts as and when. So happy to answer any questions, Jack.
Thank you, Craig. I would urge people to attend. I think it's really important in our role as Standards Committee that we do go out and do these observations, because it's something about that lived experience, isn't there, where you actually see something in real life and you see how it's operating and get an understanding. But also, I think it adds credibility to our role from the Town and Community Council and other councillors' perspective as well. They see us taking an interest and also then speaking from a position of knowledge and an informed position as well. So I would encourage people, and perhaps we can send in our request to Craig. Bring Carolyn in a minute in to the discussion in a minute. But what I did want to say was I think also attending council meetings would be good. I picked up on the new scrutiny arrangements, Craig, and would be helpful to know, perhaps circulate a paper as to how they've changed, having been head of member support and scrutiny in another life. I particularly am interested to see how things have changed. So I shall be going to one or two of those, Craig.
Very much welcome to, Chair. When we say we have changed scrutiny, we haven't fundamentally ripped it up and almost start again. What we've looked at is in respect of our model of the way that scrutiny works. We had a report from Audit Wales which highlighted that perhaps we were missing a few opportunities to be able to do things and to get the full benefit out of the scrutiny regime. So we were what we would call very wedded to a model of what's referred to as pre-scrutiny. So what that means is that before the Cabinet or Cabinet members would make a decision, it would always be scrutinised by the members of that particular committee. So if they were about to make a decision on something that was social services related, the Social Services Scrutiny Committee would meet before that decision ultimately was being made. What we've recognised, though, as part of that is that we were limiting opportunities for the Scrutiny Committee to really get into the detail of matters, to be selective in the approach that they were adopted, because they were not having their own work programme or their own forward work programme which interested them and where they felt that they could contribute more to decision making within the council. So we've just slightly amended our model to try and have a little bit more of the wider scope that scrutiny can allow. So we have what's now referred to as pre-scrutiny, which looks at certain matters ultimately that the Cabinet will be considering, but not everything. We have post-scrutiny, where the scrutiny members have got the opportunity to what they call hold the Cabinet to account for the decision making and to look back at decision making as to whether it had the intended impacts, the intended effects that we wanted it to. Could it have been improved? Do we need to do something slightly different? So it's more looking back certain things that have been decided, and also as well looking at performance reviews to make sure that where we are setting our KPIs, we are setting our targets, we're meeting them. If we're not meeting them, why are we not meeting them? What more could we be doing in that sense? So try to make it a much more rounded process compared to what we've had previously. So as Councillor Llewellyn mentioned, it's still bedding in. We started it in May. I think we're on about our second or third meeting of each of the individual scrutiny committees, because we had the intervening summer period and of course the election where we had to stand down a lot of meetings. So it's a very new process for officers and members. So please do, Chair, well, do attend if you wish to see one of those, and we certainly find one that can be a little bit more interesting for you. I'd recommend, if members are going to look at meetings for council, is always quite interesting. That's the one that probably has the more debate, the more discussion, and the more different elements there. A planning committee can be quite interesting. Governance and audit committee can be interesting. So there's a wide range there. So please do select what you think may be of interest to you.
Thank you, Craig. Carolyn.
Yes, two things, Chair. I noticed that, well, I can't notice Neath Town Council on the list of councils there, so I don't know if that's an omission. I don't see why they should get away with it. And the other thing is that face-to-face or virtual meetings, my understanding is that all meetings should be hybrid or available for people to listen in on. And I'm wondering, do these face-to-face meetings, are those councils, do they not have multi-location arrangements in place, because they are supposed to?
I think I left Neath off inadvertently, Karen. So I will put those dates in, because yes, you're right. Nobody gets away with it in that sense. Everyone can have the invite ultimately to go. It's just for some reason I haven't included it. I've got the dates for it, so I can add that and I'll recirculate it to members. From what I'm gathering, speaking to a couple of different community council clerks, is there are some are very much ahead of the game and they've got their hybrid equipment ultimately in place. There are some are still working towards progressing it, and they've not been in that position yet. So yes, you are right. The legislation does require those elements of hybrid ultimately to be in place, and different authorities have been doing it in a very different way at the moment to meet the requirements. So where I've indicated face-to-face, it just basically is meant that they've got the facility, they're doing it where you may have to be in the room ultimately to try and get the full benefit of it. You wouldn't be able to observe all of the meeting hybridly, I seem to get the impression from what they've told me. But if you've got a particular one, maybe of a date that you think you'd like to go to that town council, please do come back to me and I will certainly find out, well, is there a way to bring you in virtually to save you having to travel down to attend the meeting?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I think it's quite interesting actually, because the push from One Voice Wales and Welsh Government was to get these hybrid meetings or multi-location meetings, 2 years ago, I suppose. So it's interesting to see why, interesting to ask then the question as to why they're not all doing it now. Thank you for the answer, though.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, sorry, Duncan.
It's on the same theme with Pontardawe. It's just virtual, so it's not face to face. Assuming that's accurate. And given what we heard from Rob and others earlier about non-verbal communication and the missed opportunities one has of being in just that hybrid space and not having face to face, I was just puzzled as to why one council would choose to do it that way. And I'm not expecting an answer, of course, but I just as an observation, really.
And it ties in very much to the legislation. It does say, obviously, you make arrangements to enable meetings to be able to be attended hybridly, and different authorities take very different approaches ultimately with it. So, for example, there's nothing stopping every single meeting being virtual in that sense. You don't require that physical basis to enable it to take place, but everyone adopts a very different approach for it. But no, interesting point.
Thank you all very much. If we can send our requests through to Craig as to which ones we would like to go to, as long as we don't all pick the same town and community council and go mob-handed to one. So just to mitigate that, Craig will. Yes.
I'll make the recommendations as to which one I think would be interesting ones for you to go to.
Yes. Where we'll be able to learn the most about proceedings of community councils. Yes. Yes. And also, if anybody's interested in our own council meetings as well, to let Craig know that too. Thanks very much. And the I think it's the final.
Yeah.
Is it the final item? Is our work programme, Craig?
Thank you very much, Chair. So then just a note about what we'll be looking at in some of our next meetings now going into next year. So our next meeting will be early part of January. I decided we'll focus a little bit that one about some learning and development opportunities, picking up some of the issues that we've spoken about previously, and just to cover some wide variety about conflict resolution, etc. But I think the focus of that meeting hopefully is going to be another group of elected members joining us to dispel the myths of the Standards Committee, remove that fear that people seem to have of you almost as part of the process. So we should hopefully have a handful of members with us next year.
Good. Well, I think we very much look forward to that because they are proving to be very effective, very useful, and giving us a real insight into members' behaviour. And I think the last one with the backbenchers was particularly useful because they obviously bring a different perspective to things. So that's going to be really helpful. So if there's no other business, Craig, any other urgent items or anything? Good. Well, we look forward to the next meeting in January, and thank you all very much indeed for your contributions today. A really good meeting, and thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carolyn. Bye-bye.
Bye.